Hi, I'm Dave Lundahl, CEO for InsightsNow, and thank you for joining us today for this webinar. This webinar is on a great subject. It's all about COVID and how the post-COVID consumer is so much driven by trust. So before we get into the subject matter, a little bit of housekeeping. And especially if you're new to this system, webinars now, you can, at any time, you have a question, you can put in the question into the question chat area, and then I will address those specific questions at the very end. So looking forward to that and having a good exchange. Now, during the last 4 years, we have been working with a really interesting segment of consumers. And these are primary shoppers that represent about 28% of the US population. And we call them clean label enthusiasts. And clean label enthusiasts, they're the types of consumers, they're looking at the back panel, reading what all the ingredient statements are. They have very specific attitudes about those ingredients, and they will make a lot of choices based on what those are. Now, we're interested in this group because we have found that they are a key indicator for future behavior. So we looked at clean label enthusiasts, and we looked at some other non-clean label enthusiasts, primary shoppers in the US, looked to see how they're different. And we have been doing some really cool research ever since the beginning of the pandemic. And I'll tell you about it. So as you can see from this chart, we did a lot of qualitative work, and we reported on that. If you get on our website into the Innovation Center, you can download a lot of reports from some of the things that we are discovering. Now, the last 4 items in here, these are research we did starting about this time last year. And the last one we completed just about 30 days ago. So very new research. This is the first time we've ever really shown this work. And in particular, we also did, during this time, we've been doing some quantitative research about every month or so, where we've actually looked at a snapshot of what are the underlying motivators driving consumer choices amongst clean label enthusiasts. So I'm going to weave together a story of some of the things that we're seeing and what we believe is the new normal for consumers moving out from here. Now, about a year ago, we did some work on what people were sort of anticipating the Christmas and the other holidays around the end of the year that people were expecting. And what we found is a lot of intrepidation. People were really, as you probably can remember from yourself, not expecting to be able to do a lot of things that you normally do around the holidays. In fact, 45% things of the people that we responded to said, it's going to be completely different. I'm really reticent to go shopping, be out there with other people, and I'm not expecting to be able to get together with friends, and in some cases family members, as I expected. So radical shift in behavior from what people were normally used to. Now then, getting into the beginning part of 2021, we went through a piece of research we've been doing for the last 4 years, and we asked people about their clean living resolutions. What sort of products would they be buying for the upcoming year? And what we discovered is people were decreasing, not increasing, but decreasing, adding more fruits and vegetables to their diets. We found they were not increasing, but they're decreasing the amount of sugar, that they would be expecting, or the reduction of carbs. That was dropping as a key resolution. Further, people were expecting to have not more, but fewer healthier beverages. But on the flip side, we're seeing and continued an increase in rethinking meat, adding more meat alternatives to one's diet. So the question is why? And part of the story I want to talk about is starting with Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I'm sure a lot of you have seen this before, but what Maslow's hierarchy really talks about is down in the lower rungs of this pyramid are the things that are much more fundamental, which means will become, when it's important, a key driver of your behavior. So once you've taken care of safety, people move up towards more things that are sensorial, social, and experiential. Now, during the COVID times, our expectations is that safety and things that were functional would become much more important and be a bigger driver of behavior than sensorial, social, and other things that are more experiential. And in fact, that's kind of what we saw. In fact, the way we designed this research is we bucketed a whole bank of questions about different types of motivators in different situations to buy different products. And we lumped them into functional motivators, social, sensorial, and psychological. And when I say sensorial, I mean things that are about the sensory experience, the enjoyment of an experience. Whereas I say psychological are things that lift our psyche, that give us sort of, raise the bar in our mood, give us surprise, overcome boredom, amuse us, give us things that are intriguing, and the social side of things about us or about others that elicit the emotions of either pride or anger or contempt or admiration, and so on and so forth. And so we found during the early stages of COVID time, these functional motivators were much greater than the social, the sensorial, and the psychological motivators. But by about a year ago, those things started to come more in line with what we call a fairly normal pattern, where functional motivators are less sensorial motivators. That means the sensory experiences that people expect are now replacing to what has been historically number one. And if you see from this slide, over time, the same pattern is pretty much stayed the same. In fact, functional continues to drop a little bit more. So people have adapted to a new normal, that Maslow's hierarchy down there, people are not so fearful, and so it's changing the types of buying patterns, the things that they're looking to do to improve their lives. Now, the second piece of sort of emergence of behavioral drivers, and the thing that I want to really spend the rest of this time today in this webinar talking about is trust. Because trust is becoming a key piece. Now, trust is something that consumers use more and more when they are stressed as a control mechanism, when they're fearful as a way to gain control of their lives. And you saw this a lot where people were, during the pandemic, buying things that they're fearful of. They're buying things that would be that they trusted, that would help them get a more cleaner environment, help so they could have a better immune system. Things that they would buy brands that they really trusted rather than things that are very new. Now, in 2019, when we first did this piece of research, so we were able to compare 2019 to work we just did this last month. And one of the things we discovered in 2019 is that small brands coming from small companies are a lot more trustworthy in the minds of consumers, especially clean label enthusiasts. So if you come out with a claim that something is minimally processed, natural, authentic, pure, fresh, farm sustainable, that if it's coming from the voice of a brand that's from a small company, it's much more believable than if it comes from a large corporate, large company. We also asked in 2019 about people's trust in the U.S. food system. And this is a comparison on clean label enthusiasts versus regular consumers. And what we found then is that over half of clean label enthusiasts distrusted the U.S. food system. They did not agree with the statement, "I trust today's food system." Pretty dramatic. However, equally dramatic is that in the last 2 years, this is the pattern that's emerged. Clean label enthusiasts have shifted to be a lot more agreeing with the statement, "I trust today's food system." Much more aligned with regular consumers today. Now, we also asked back in 2019 and today, how has the responsibility shifted? I mean, who do you hold responsible for ensuring the safety of the food products that you provide for you and your family? And what we see here is that there has been a dramatic change, that the holding responsible is down for farmers, it's down for family members, it's down for if you're a grocery store or if you're a restaurant. Now, also though, we asked, how has your trust shifted? That is, which of the following do you trust to ensure food safety? And we found here is that if you're a federal or state regulator, it's really good news, because consumer trust in you is up slightly also for food companies and farmers, as well as doctors, nutritionists, dietitians, and scientists. So, it is also, I must say, is also though down for family members. So what you're seeing is a shift in not only who do you hold responsible, but more importantly, who do you trust? Now, this trust can also be looked at because the complete story is by looking at the difference between who you hold responsible and trust gives you an indication of the gap in trust remaining. So what this shows is that if you're a food company, you still have a long way to go. More opportunity, perhaps, if you want to say that, to gain back trust. And to a lesser degree, if you're a federal or state regulator, and even a lesser degree, a farmer, you have an opportunity to reduce this gap through your marketing, your messaging, and the actions that you take that consumers become aware of. Now, we also were thinking when we were getting ready to field this research in August is how could we learn more about consumer behavior in this new normal that goes beyond clean label. And we thought, one of the key differences is this sort of dichotomy we're seeing amongst a lot of people in the U.S. about attitudes towards vaccinations. Do you trust the safety of COVID-19 vaccines? And we asked this question, we found about 21% of our sample were distrusting of vaccines. And when we looked at this further, we found that this seems to be kind of a rural, urban, or suburban divide in terms of where these people are that say, no, I don't trust the safety of vaccinations. And this fits a lot with what we've seen in the news and other sort of reports about vaccination rates around the country. But it was really interesting here is we found a very strong correlation between the attitudes of vaccinations and the attitudes about today's food system. And those that distrust vaccinations are also very distrustful of today's food system. In fact, about 60% of the people that are distrustful of vaccinations also do not agree, I trust today's food system. And in asking who you hold responsible, it's really interesting. It's about the same. Holding responsible does not seem to correlate at all with distrust of vaccinations in terms of holding responsible for today's food safety. But where you start to see differences is in who do you trust. Federal, state regulators are less trusted amongst those that distrust vaccines. Food companies to a lesser degree, and also scientists. Now, the rural-urban divide also comes into play as you see a increase in terms of farmers versus those that amongst distrust for vaccines amongst those that do not trust it. So that seems to make a lot of sense. Now, the last thing we did is we wanted to look into something called implicit biases. And implicit biases are things that we take, everybody has points of view. And a key element of human nature is to discount things that go against your point of view, or to confirm, to have more believability to things that align with your point of view. And so what we did here is we took 7 different sweeteners. Some of these sweeteners we knew ahead of time were things that people had generally a very good point of view about, and other sweeteners, such as artificial sweeteners like sucralose, that had generally people have a negative point of view at. And we created headlines for each of these sweeteners, 4 headlines for each. 2 were positive, 2 were negative. One of the positives was false, and one of the negatives was true. And we provided this information in terms of headline sources. And we looked at 14 different sources, and this is the question. It's an implicit test. It's a way that on rapid fire, we showed people these different headlines from a source, such as honey increases your blood sugar levels in diabetics as a headline, and it's from Google Scholar. And then we asked people to respond, believe or disbelieve it. We also timed how fast. So the faster we know that people respond, believe or disbelieve, we know it's much more implicit. It's much more hardwired into our gut reactions. So by doing this, we are able to measure when a high percentage of people respond very fast, yes, I believe it, it'll have a high score to this index we created. And if a very high percentage of people disbelieve, it will get a low score. And what we found is amongst clean label enthusiasts, when people have a positive point of view towards things like agave, honey, monk fruit, or stevia, there was a tendency to believe the positive headlines more so than the negative headlines. And we saw the flip side, and this is in 2019, for negative points of view. Much more believable when you have a negative point of view about a sweetener such as aspartame, sucralose, or even sugar. But it's interesting, in most recent study here in 2021, is that the implicit bias amongst clean label enthusiasts is smaller. So this is aligning with this whole idea of more trust in the U.S. food system and in terms of more trusting in larger institutions. Now, when we ask the same questions looking at people that distrust vaccines versus trust, we found that the implicit bias amongst those that distrust vaccines is actually greater, especially with regard to having a preset negative point of view about something, such as having a negative point of view about aspartame, sucralose, and sugar. The tendency was much more believing in things when it's a negative headline. In fact, 15-point difference swing on this index. And when we asked these consumers about why they believe content, those that distrusted is much more about aligns with my core beliefs, the source is not biased, and the content is not provided by a scientific expert. And the sources also had a dramatic. The more sort of conservative the source, the more believable that content. So, what does this mean? Well, in summary, adapting to this new normal, we see that consumer motives have pretty much stabilized now for about 1 year. There's been a significant decrease in fear and functional-based motives, an increase in motives for buying things based on their sensorial properties, whether you like it or not, whether it has a great experience in terms of what you expect, and to lesser degrees, but on the increase, social sort of situational motives and things that give us a lift psychologically. We're also seeing this rethinking of meat is on the rise, and we believe that this is really a part of a different trend where the whole idea of clean label is further evolving to be something that's also good for the environment. Now, we've seen this improving in trust in the U.S. food system and a decline in implicit biases. And except for this one group that I'll talk about a little bit here. If you're a federal state regulator, really good news. We're seeing the first rise up in trust that we've seen in several years. But yet food companies still have a long way to go, especially if you're a large brand. And if you're a farmer or retailer, you know, you're not being held as responsible for food safety as in the past. Now, with regard to this 21% of people that are also very reticent to get vaccinated, you know, we're seeing it is pretty much a rural sort of urban split. I don't know if it's political or cultural, but we do know that at the root of it is these implicit biases driven by the sources that people read and the inherent beliefs that they've already created. So, what does this all mean? Well, I think there's 5 key takeaways. The first is that no longer can you rely just on health and wellness if you're going to create a product that's going to launch into the marketplace and expect it to be successful. You need to return to the roots of ensuring that the sensory experience with those products is really good, as well as really watching the opportunities that you can create for design of products that have social purposes or actually will create a psychological lift, surprise people, intrigue them, and overcome the boredoms that they have in their lives. Second, clean label means more than just healthy. It also means good for the environment. Third, really good news if you're a government regulator, belief in science is returning. So you can utilize this perhaps if you're a food company or any sort of consumer packaged goods company, is to focus on claims that have really good science-based claims to be made. And if you're launching a new brand, even if you're a large company, launch it with a new brand that is positioned to be smaller. And last, if you're seeking to win back the trust of consumers, especially those that might be a little bit more on a conservative spectrum, be more reticent to things that are related to government-based or science-based. Focus on aligning with people's core values and to consistently and continuously message same things through trusted sources so that you can eventually decrease, erode implicit biases that people have. So with that, I hope you have enjoyed this content. I hope you've had some really good takeaways. If you have any specific questions for me, I would be glad to answer any questions you may have. Here's my contact information. Or if you know anyone else at InsightsNow, just call them up and they'll be able to answer any questions you may have. With that, I am available right now to answer any questions you have through this chat feature. So fire away. Now I can see there's already one question, and this question has to do with the whole idea of going back and asking some questions about the 4 quadrants of consumer motives. And I'm going to pick this slide back up and show it here. So I believe the question is about these, and the question is, can you explain sensory and the psychological motivators? Well, glad to. So sensory motivators are things that people align that I think of the emotional impact of I enjoy something. So it has to do with enjoyment, things that people are satisfied or dissatisfied based on the pure sensorial pleasures that they have. Psychological are things that elevate people's moods, so lift them. And it could also be things that you could like what a project does to you in terms of being something that's exciting, new, but it could also be something that just overcomes your boredom, something that provides amusement, something that surprises you in a good way, and so on and so forth. Any other questions? Okay, well, with that, I will say thank you again for joining us today, and I hope you had some good takeaways from this. And again, join us again for every month when we do these webinars. Our next one will be a month from now on different topics. So with that, again, thank you for joining us. Have a great day.